All right, y'all, today we're about to get down and dirty with some data cleaning. Here's what a beginner data analyst would do to clean data. Spend hours writing case statements, manually fixing all the null values, and standardizing data row by row. But here's what an advanced data analyst would do. 30 seconds and the same result.
How does he do that?
Now, here's the bad news. Even though AI saves you hours of work, it's not gonna fully replace your SQL knowledge. The other bad news is that data cleaning is something that's super annoying, but it takes up almost 80% of our time as data analysts because real-world messy data is dirty, and you gotta know how to clean it. If you're brand new to SQL, start out with my free Intro to SQL course below, link in the description. I'm gonna show you the top 7 skills for data cleaning that you absolutely need to know, and I'm also gonna show you how you can leverage AI to help speed up the process. Before we get down and dirty coding, I wanna first show you how powerful AI can be as a tool that we can leverage to work faster as data analysts, and then I'm gonna show you why we can't fully rely on AI and the ethical issues and dangers of it. Okay, I have ChatGPT opened and I actually just uploaded my dirty data set, which I ironically also made with ChatGPT because I prompt engineered it based on the skills that I wanted to cover today. And it actually made me a really great data set that was dirty so I could actually clean it. So I made a data set that was dirty so I could clean it. It makes sense, okay? But to actually show you how powerful AI can be in helping us write code and clean data, I'm just gonna ask a very simple prompt. Usually you wanna be very specific about what you want, but I'm just gonna be super vague. Can you clean this data set? And let's see what we end up with. Do, 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 do. Okay, this only took about 2 minutes. I uploaded this data set, asked, can you clean this data? I didn't even ask for anything specific or identify what was actually wrong with the data set. But first I'm gonna show you what was wrong with the data set. So here's the messy customers data set. So we can see that the first name and last name column have a lot of just different values. We have a bunch of null values in the first names and the last names. We also have names that look normal, like Smith right here looks good to go. And then we have names that are in double quotes like John and single quotes like Lee. So there's a bunch of different formatting errors with all of these different name values in the first name and last name column. In the email column, we also have null values with no email. And then the state column is honestly just a disaster. We have California capitalized, we have California, the state code, we have Texas capitalized, we have a lowercase state code, uppercase state code. We just have a lot of different types of values in the state column. And then the dates are also a disaster too, and dates are always super hard to clean. So we have date times, then we have regular date values, we have dates and date times with double quotes, and we even have instances with double quotes with a space value after the date. These are honestly just really messy, really bad. And here's the output that AI gave me in about 1 to 2 minutes without me giving any further instructions. At a first glance, this data set actually looks really good. We don't have the weird quotes around all the names or around the dates. The state codes look fairly standardized for the most part, a little less messy, less variation in the values. And then all the emails are here, but I do see some potential errors. And this is why we cannot fully rely on AI to do all of our data cleaning. It is a tool that we leverage, but we don't rely on it completely, and we never, ever, ever copy and paste things directly from AI and just use that without checking it. Because without doing a full-on investigation, I'm just in my Numbers app on my Mac, which isn't the greatest, but if I actually wanted to fully analyze this, I could bring this into Snowflake or Google Sheets, Excel, and actually analyze it further. But it looks like it filled in all of our null values. Oh, okay, it looks like it did fill them in with unknown, which I think is actually an okay decision, but we don't really know how it actually handled those null values behind the scenes. And the other issue I really see here is we don't know how it handled all the states and the messiness. It looks like for the most part, we have Texas, California, and Florida, kind of standardized. Again, I'm not checking all 1,000 rows with like a big analysis. I'm just kind of looking at like a high level, but it looks like it somehow classified all the New Yorks as New York in all caps. So that is kind of a mismatch in the formatting types. It doesn't look like it standardized all the different states into state codes because New York is clearly not a state code, which I think is actually considered a big error. And now I'm kind of horrified because I'm realizing that there are no null emails, and it's just using jess@example.com for all the unknown emails because I don't see any null values. And I'm seeing Jesses for people named Maria. I'm seeing Jesses for people named Nina Brown. Like, that is probably not that person's email. So we cannot fully rely on AI for everything, and we actually have to understand how to write good SQL code, because if you just blindly put things into AI and just take it and don't actually QA it and validate the results, it looks fine on the surface. This looks way better, but there's no transparency as to how it cleaned the data and the things that it did. We had a bunch of null values for the email column that have somehow been imputed with a different value. And then we also have just like a mismatch in formatting with the states. And who knows what else happened under the hood without us even knowing. Also want to make a side note that you have to be very careful about putting data into AI like ChatGPT. You can't just drag and drop an Excel file from your company into a tool like that, because there's a lot of security risks and personal information and just ethical issues. So you have to be super careful about that. I only did this because this was a data set that I made with ChatGPT, so it's all fake, anonymized, not real users, but you would have to be really careful, especially if you work in like finance or healthcare. Like, please do not just dump a bunch of data into AI tools without knowing, the risks and legal stuff involved. By the way, if you want to land your next data role even faster, I have the perfect system for you. It covers everything you need to get a data job. If you want to grab my free 3-step roadmap below, it's free down in the description. Now let's get back to data cleaning. So I have my messy data set imported into Snowflake, and again, I generated this with ChatGPT, so it's all fake users and fake information. And we already kind of talked about a lot of the issues. We have double quotes and single quotes around a lot of the names. We have a bunch of null values. The state formatting is very inconsistent, so we're going to want to standardize that to make them all consistent in the way that they're formatted. And our dates are honestly just a mess, and I hate doing dates in SQL. So stay tuned if you want to see me suffer and clean dates. The first thing we're going to do is fix our first name column. So let's get rid of all of the single quotes and double quotes around these strings or text values. So let's ask ChatGPT, what can we do? How can we replace these values in SQL? Okay, so here we have the basic syntax. We can use the replace function. We can input our column name, and then we can put in the double quotes, which is what we want to replace, but we have to put those around single quotes because we're looking for the string of double quotes. So we have to put the single quotes around the double quotes because the double quotes are a subset of that string value. And we want to replace them with an empty string. So we're going to want to use 2 single string values with nothing inside, not even a space. That's an empty string. So by replacing those double quotes with an empty string, we're basically just removing the double quotes. Okay, so I copied that basic syntax from AI, and now I'm testing it in Snowflake to see if it actually works. If it didn't work, I could provide more details to ChatGPT and maybe provide an example of here's what I'm starting with and here's what I want it to look like, and then kind of refine my results, but it does work. So I'm basically going to any first name value, and then if it has a string of double quotes inside the string, I'm replacing it with nothing. So we can see the example John has double quotes on the beginning and end of the word. Now they're just removed. So in the output, we have no double quotes. Good. But that doesn't cover the use case with single quotes. So Maria and Jess, they still have the single quotes. So what we can do is we can figure out how to remove the single quotes from the string as well. So we can start out with our single quotes because we know we have to remove a string, but the string we want to remove is a single quote. So 1 quote. But if I type a single quote in between the single quotes, SQL gets all weird because it's kind of confused because it thinks that this is like an entire string and then I started a new string with this last quote. So what I have to do is actually add another single quote so that way I can escape the single quote. Sometimes when you're coding, especially with strings, you have to escape a value and basically tell it like, I'm not making a string. I want you to just look at this value. It's kind of weird, but just trust me. Now in the column test 2, we've successfully solved for the situation with single quotes around the name. So we have 2 replace functions that work, one for the double quotes and one for the single quotes. How can we combine them together? So what we're going to do is we're actually going to nest this logic inside of the other replace function. So we're going to copy it, and now we're going to paste it in here, and I'm going to erase this. So basically the inner part's going to run first. We're going to take the first name and we're going to remove the single quotes. And then we're going to take that output, that result, and then we're going to replace and remove the double quotes. Let's test it. And beautiful. Look at these beautiful names. We still have our null values, which we'll figure out a little bit later, but now we don't have any single quotes or double quotes in our name column. So let's call this first name clean, and we can actually copy and paste this logic for the last name too. So I just used the exact same logic, except I put last name in as the column name, and then I changed the alias to last name clean. And now we have a clean column of all of our first names and of all of our last names. And I will say, when you're doing data cleaning and stuff like this, you need to do so much QA and validation and make sure your logic actually works. But We're not gonna do that for this video. Ain't nobody got time for that. Another thing you also have to really understand is that by doing this data cleaning, we're not actually changing or modifying the actual table. The original table is still gonna be exactly the same. We're only modifying the first name field and the last name field in the scope of this query. So if we start another query down below or start a brand new SQL session, it's not gonna remember this data cleaning we did. It's only gonna understand the data cleaning and the scope of the query that we made those changes in. You can actually modify the underlying data using something called update in SQL, but to be honest, data analysts aren't really usually updating the data too often. Usually it's the data engineers and sometimes the analytics engineers that are doing that, and data analysts are kind of stuck doing their data cleaning for their analyses and their queries. So that's how I'm gonna do it in this video, because it's honestly the most realistic to what you're gonna actually have to do on the job versus those videos out there that teach you like the textbook definitions of things that you barely use. Another really cool string manipulation function that we can do that's gonna help us clean up our data set a little bit is we can actually combine the first name and the last name together into a full name column. So we're gonna use a function called concatenate, and inside of concatenate, you can put any list of strings or string columns, and it's just gonna glue those together and concatenate them. So we're gonna put in our clean first name and clean last name and then just concatenate them. And we're gonna call it full name. And honestly, the output looks pretty good, but everything's in camel case. It would honestly be a lot easier to read if we had a space between the first name and the last name, and more stakeholder friendly, because non-technical stakeholders, honestly, you have to make it super simple for them. So now I'm gonna show you how I would solve for this issue using ChatGPT. By the way, I already know how to solve for this problem, but I'm trying to show you that you might encounter problems or issues as you're data cleaning and coding in SQL, and this is how I kind of approach using ChatGPT to help me debug and get the actual results that I'm looking for. So you'll see there's actually a few different kind of solutions. There's these two bars that we can use to concatenate, or the concatenate function. I'm using the concatenate function right now, so we're gonna continue on with this solution, but there's a lot of different types of ways to do things in SQL, so you honestly just have to like try different things sometimes and see what works in the dialect and environment you're working in. So what we're gonna have to do is add in a 1-character string between our first name and our last name, and the 1 character we're gonna have is a space. So we're gonna put a space between our single quotes, and then we're gonna add a comma, and now it's gonna add in a space between our first name and our last name. And beautiful, everything is really coming together. Now this is where things get really messy. If I'm being completely honest, no data person likes to deal with dates because there's so many different like formatting issues that can come up, and there's so many different ways that dates can look. They're honestly just a huge pain in the butt. But we're gonna use the same replace functions we used before with the first name and the last name nested inside of each other, and we're gonna use that to remove the double quotes from the dates. And also, I think there's some examples of single quotes in here as well. Okay, now I can't find one. I think there were examples with single quotes, so I'm just gonna leave the single quote part in there just in case. And finally, if you'll notice, we do have some dates and date times, which are different data types. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna convert everything in this column into dates. That way it's gonna remove the timestamps and everything will be standardized into the same format. We can do that using the cast function. I'm gonna show you in ChatGPT real quick. This is the syntax of the cast function. So we could say cast our date column as date, and that's gonna convert all of the dates and date times in that column. Here's the syntax for using cast in SQL. You can use it to change something into a different data type. So you can put in a value or a column and it'll change the data type into something else. In this case, we're gonna be changing our date column, which right now has dates and date times, into all dates. So basically like this, but there's a shorthand way to do it in Snowflake. Instead of using the cast function, you can use 2 colons like this and then follow with date. And now we can see how all of our dates have been cleaned. We removed all the extra quotes and all the timestamps. So now we have a bunch of clean dates that we can actually work with and use. So we could actually do things now like aggregate our data or visualize by day, because now all of our dates are in the same format versus a bunch of random formats. But we're not doing that right now because this is a data cleaning video, so we're just gonna keep on data cleaning. I know that was a lot so far, but basically now we have clean first names, clean last names, and clean dates. So the next thing we need to do is deal with all of those null emails. Going back to our original data set, in our email column, it looks pretty clean, but we have nulls, and sometimes it's okay to have null values. So depending on the situation, I might leave them null as is, values, but in this case, we're gonna replace them with something else so I can show you some really cool things in SQL. We can use a function called COALESCE, and COALESCE is gonna return the first non-null value. So you can input as many columns and values you want in COALESCE, and it's gonna return the first non-null item. So a lot of times it's used to replace null values because you can put in a column, and then if it's null, it'll return the next thing you give it. So in our case, we said coalesce email. So if an email is not null, meaning if it's there, it's gonna keep that same value. But if the email is null and it's not there, we're instead gonna replace the null value with the string unknown. And I can make this string anything I want. I can say bananas if I want to, but like, why would I do that? So now if we scroll down, we can see that all the null emails in the clean column now have unknown in this column. And again, it depends on your use case, what you want to do, but I would maybe put unknown here if I were sending this over to stakeholders. Maybe the sales team is doing some outreach and it's not really helpful for them to see a null value. They might not really understand what it means. So maybe I would replace it with unknown so that way they would visually see, okay, we don't know their email, it's unknown. There's also other functions to replace null values as well, but I love coalesce because you can put multiple items in here, not just two. For example, maybe somehow we have some sort of reason to believe that we can guess their email. This is actually really bad business practice, so don't do this and just try to like guess someone's email because the chances of you being wrong are extremely high. But I just want to show you an example of coalesce with multiple conditions. So I added in the concat function and we're going to concatenate the first name, the cleaned first name with the string at email.com. So maybe if we don't know their email, we're going to replace it with their first name at email.com. Again, the chances of this being that person's email are super low, so this is probably not a great idea. But if for some reason their first name is null and this entire output is null, then it's going to use unknown for the final output. And that's how you can use coalesce with multiple options to replace null values. And it's always going to return the first non-null option. But I'm going to remove this because guessing someone's email is honestly just a really silly idea. And now our emails are clean. So real quick, I'm going to show you how to check for duplicates in a separate query. This is also a really common interview question, so make sure you know how to do this. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna select email, and then we're gonna count the number of rows for every single email. That's gonna count all of the duplicates, how many times that email shows up in our data set. So we're grouping by email, and then we're filtering all those groups, so filtering the emails with those that have a count greater than 1. So that's basically gonna show us all of our emails with duplicate counts. Okay, so now we can see all of our emails that have duplicate values. So it looks like there's only 11 distinct emails in our list, which is kind of crazy. But again, I made this data set with ChatGPT. So a lot of these have a ton of duplicates. We have 105 for this email. And also remember that null values and group by are also going to be treated as a separate category. That doesn't mean that they're actually duplicates. It just means they all have a null email. So this could be a bunch of different users that all have a null email that are now being grouped together in the group by. So we have to be careful there. And here's a query that we can actually use to remove duplicates. And again, we're just removing them in the scope of this query, not from the original data set, but we can use our row number window function. If you're not familiar with window functions, go check out my video on them and just hang on for a sec. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna partition all of our data by email. So we're gonna take all the ones with this email over here, all the ones with this email over here, all the ones with this email over here. And then within each of those groups, we're gonna order by customer ID, and then we're just gonna choose the top one. And we're choosing the top one here in the qualify clause. The qualify clause is kind of like where, but for window functions. So it's how you can filter data based on the result of a window function. This is more advanced SQL, so don't stress if you're super confused right now. And this is how we can remove duplicates. So I'm going to copy and paste this row number logic into our query with all of our other cleaned things. And I'm also going to pull in our qualify clause as well up here, so that way we can actually filter out the duplicate emails. And now our output is almost done. We have a bunch of clean first names, a bunch of clean last names. We have full names where we smashed them together with concatenate, clean dates, clean emails with our unknowns for the unknown ones. And this row number column we don't actually need in the output because we filtered for row number equals 1. So we can actually remove it here and instead paste this logic down in the qualified to replace this alias. And then we can just remove it from our select statement. That way it's not shown in the output. It's being used behind the scenes to filter using qualify. There's actually one last issue that I see here that's kind of messing up our results. So I do see some null full names, even though sometimes we do have the first name or we do have the last name. So why is the full name showing up null? Remember, the full name column is one that we created by concatenating our clean first name and our clean last name. And it looks like it's showing up null for all the instances that are either missing a first name or a last name. So this is the grand finale. I'm gonna send a screenshot to AI and ask how they would fix this. Again, if you're working in the workplace, do not put screenshots of your company's confidential data into AI. Instead, you'd wanna describe the issues and create some fake anonymized examples. But since this is a fake data set, I'm just gonna put a screenshot into AI. And now I'm asking AI. Okay, if I'm being honest, I don't even like the recommendation that ChatGPT has. It has this concat WS function, which I've never actually heard of before. I just tried it out and it's not doing what I want it to do, even though ChatGPT suggested it. So this is just a reminder that everything ChatGPT says might not be true or the best thing for you to do for your situation. So always try things out. If it doesn't work, come up with another solution. So I said, no, I want to replace the null names with an empty string instead, and then concatenate them together, because I think that's going to be the best order of process to go through for this logic. So now it's going to give me some sample code I can use. So now we're going to use COALESCE with the first name and the last name and replace the null values with an empty string and then concatenate it. And I think this is going to fix our issue. So that way, if we're missing a first name or a last name, it's not going to produce a null full name, because instead it's going to replace those null first names or last names with an empty string. And then it's going to give us a full name that's not complete, but at least we'll have something there instead of a null value. So now I'm going to copy and paste this over and let's see if it works for us. We have, okay, let's clean this up. Okay, and finally, we can see that this did actually fix our issue. So now for the rows that have a null last name or a null first name, it's going to include the value that we do have in the output. So even though some of these are missing a first name or missing a last name, it's at least going to provide the information that we do have in the full name clean column instead of just leaving a null value because one of the values are null. And now I replaced our original full name column with this new full name clean column that we just made. And now this result set is our final result of having a cleaned data set. Just to recap, we cleaned our first names, we cleaned our last names, and then we concatenated them into a cleaned full name column. We also cleaned and standardized our dates, and we cleaned our emails. But now the last thing we have to do is address our state column. If you remember, we have the messiest string data. We have caps, we have no caps, we have the full state name, we have all these different values in the state column. So I know that the way I want to address this is a case statement. I want to say, if you see this, California. If you see this, New York. If you see this, Florida. And I'm going to input all the different messy inconsistencies into the case statement so it knows if it sees any version of California, either spelled out, the short state code, something else that's supposed to be California, it's going to standardize it into California, the same output. And I'm actually using ChatGPT to help generate formulas that I can use to plug into my case statement. And it's also helping me come up with different ideas of how I can solve for this logic. So the first thing I'm going to do is use the lower function to make sure that whatever is in the state column is automatically put in all lowercase letters, so it makes it a little bit easier for me to look and find for what I'm looking for. And then I'm going to use n and a list of strings. So that way we're going to lowercase whatever value we have in the state column and then say if it looks like any of these strings, California. If it looks like any of these strings, Florida. And then I'm just going to input all the different options that it could look like based on our data set into each condition. And we can actually click on the header of the state column here so we can actually see all the values that are in this column. So it looks like I've accounted for CA, I've accounted for California. For Texas, we have TX and Texas spelled out. So now all I have to do is add in New York and NY. Okay, now I need to validate my logic. It gets a little messy using case statements, especially with a bunch of different strings, because if something doesn't match that logic perfectly, it might be left out of your case statement. So it looks like everything worked pretty well for the most part. I do have null values, and I realized it's the full names of the state, so I actually need to not capitalize these. So since I put the state name in the lower function and I put it in all lowercase, I have to make sure I'm also matching it to lowercase strings. And that's why those got left out of the logic. So let's put California and New York in lowercase and try again. Oh, Well, it looks like I accidentally put a period at the end of California, so that explains why that's not working. Generally, you'd want to do a lot of QA for this sort of logic and make sure you've all your bases covered, not just the current ones, but any future ones that may come up. But I'm not going to do that today. Let's just pretend that I know that it's great.
This is fine.
Because this logic works for now and for the purpose of this video. So I'm actually going to copy and paste this clean state logic, and now I can add it to my original query above, run it, and boom. Now we have an entire data set with a clean first name, a clean last name, a clean full name, a clean date, a clean email, and a clean state code, and then we deduped it on the email level. Look, data cleaning is a huge pain point for data analysts, but it's something we have to do all the time because real world data is super messy, which is why it's a super important skill to know so you can show off to hiring managers that you know how to do it. AI is a super useful tool to help speed up data cleaning, but it's still not going to replace those SQL skills. It's just going to help us clean data better and faster, which employers obviously love. If you want to speed up your SQL learning journey, I made a killer video that shows you exactly how to learn SQL in only 3 months. I break it down step by step. And if you're ready to build that complete skill set, my Big SQL Energy courses cover everything you need to know, from complete newbie to intermediate, all the way to building a portfolio and landing that job. You can find those in the description as well if you're interested. Sending you lots of big data energy your way. Bye!